I was halfway through reviewing the quarterly sales data when Martin stormed into my office. No knock, no courtesy. Just a loud, deliberate entrance meant to rattle. Typical. Elena, he barked, tossing a file onto my desk. We need to talk. Now. I glanced at the folder, then at the man I'd worked under for the last 4 years. Martin Reese, the kind of man who never looked twice at women in the office unless he needed coffee or someone to organize his calendar. He liked power, and more than that, he liked reminding others that he had it. Still, I stayed calm. I always did. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. Instead, he loomed. The board's decided to restructure the leadership team. We're moving in a different direction. And frankly, we need people who can lead, not just follow spreadsheets. I blinked, stunned for half a second. You're firing me? He smirked, like he'd just sunk a game-winning shot. Let's not be dramatic. We're releasing you from your position, effective immediately. No warning, no performance review, and certainly no recognition for the fact that my department had just delivered the highest revenue growth in 3 years. I see, I said quietly. May I ask why? His tone was clipped. You lack vision. You manage tasks, not people. And let's be honest, this industry, it needs strong leadership, assertiveness, confidence, traits you haven't exactly demonstrated. There it was, not even veiled. A dig at my gender, wrapped in buzzwords and corporate fluff. He didn't see me as a leader, not because I hadn't delivered, but because I didn't fit his outdated mold. I understand, I said, my voice steady, neutral. Martin narrowed his eyes, clearly thrown off by my composure. He expected outrage, maybe even tears. But I'd learned long ago how to control my emotions in boardrooms full of egos. I'll need your badge and company laptop by the end of the day, he added. It will disable your access by 5 p.m. HR has your severance details. I nodded and stood, extending my hand. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate the clarity he hesitated, but shook my hand. Good luck out there. As he turned and walked out, satisfied with his little coup, I sat back down and exhaled slowly. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. In fact, I felt lighter. Because what Martin didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that I wasn't just a department head. 2 weeks ago, something changed. Something big. And I had been waiting for the right moment to use it. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. My father, smiling proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony on the day he opened the company's first regional office. The same company Martin had just released me from. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame. You told me to wait, Dad. Wait until the time was right. I stood and began packing my things. I didn't take much. Just a few personal items, a mug my team gave me last Christmas, and a stack of old notebooks filled with ideas that had never made it past Martin's desk. Outside, the office buzzed with quiet curiosity. A few coworkers gave me sympathetic glances, others avoided eye contact. No one asked questions, but I saw the thoughts on their faces. Did she get fired? What did she do wrong? I left the building with a small, polite smile and no fanfare. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt the weight of 15 years inside that company slip off my shoulders. They thought they'd ended my career, but what they'd actually done was give me the green light. I reached for my phone and texted a single message to my lawyer. It's time. Prepare everything. The reply came back almost instantly. Understood. Shareholder meeting can be scheduled within 5 business days. I looked back at the glass building, glinting in the sun. Martin thought this was over, but he had no idea what was coming. The next time I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an employee. It would be as their majority shareholder. And the smile I wore that day would be real. 2 weeks earlier, I had sat in the quiet, wood-paneled office of my family's attorney, staring at a document I wasn't allowed to open until the clock struck 12 on my 30th birthday. My father had always loved theatrics. He said it made serious things feel significant, And this apparently was one of them. Elena, Mr. Harrington, our longtime family lawyer, had said with a warm, fatherly tone, "Your father left very clear instructions. You're not to open this envelope until your 30th birthday, not a day before." I had smiled politely, half curious, half amused. "What is it? Some kind of delayed birthday card?" He gave me a look that told me he knew and that he wasn't about to spoil the surprise. "Your father was a man of vision," he said instead, "and he trusted you more than anyone." That sentence stayed with me in the days that followed. My father, the founder and former CEO of the very company that had just let me go without ceremony, had always believed in foresight, in planning ahead. And he believed in me. When he passed away 5 years ago, the company changed. It became colder, more calculated, less about the people and more about the numbers. Martin had joined shortly after, charming the board, flexing his MBA, and slowly dismantling the culture my father had built. I'd stayed, thinking I could protect what remained. But now I realized my father had known something like this might happen, and he'd prepared for it. On the morning of my birthday, I opened the envelope alone, sitting in the same spot where he used to read the paper every Sunday. Sunlight streaming through the window, a quiet warmth in the air. Inside was a letter and a formal document with embossed seals. I unfolded the letter first. It was handwritten in my father's neat script. "Elena, if you're reading this, you've turned 30, and that means you're ready." I never doubted it, not for a second. "You've spent your life working twice as hard for half the recognition." I saw it even when you thought I didn't. I saw the sacrifices, the late nights, the integrity no one else noticed. I also saw how the company changed after I left. And I knew there might come a time when you'd need more than a seat at the table. So I gave you the table. I paused, blinking hard. My hands trembled slightly as I turned to the document behind the letter. It was a trust agreement. Filed and notarized. According to the trust, 90% of the company shares my father had retained when he stepped down had been placed under my name, held until I turned 30, with full voting rights activated immediately. 90%. I read it 3 times, then once more just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't just a shareholder. I was the majority owner, the controlling shareholder. My entire body buzzed with disbelief, adrenaline, and something else. Power. Quiet, measured, undeniable power. I called Mr. Harrington immediately. "Is this real?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "Yes," he replied simply. "Your father structured the trust to avoid public filings. It was airtight. The board has no idea, unless you choose to tell them." "Why didn't he activate it sooner?" "He wanted you to experience the company on your own terms first, to see who would reveal themselves, to decide if you wanted it before you used it." That line hit me hard. I'd spent years being underestimated, overlooked, talked over in meetings. I'd watched Martin get praised for ideas I'd quietly suggested, watched male colleagues rise faster despite doing less. I'd smiled through it all, thinking patience and hard work would pay off. Now I realized it hadn't been time that was missing. It was leverage. And suddenly I had it. I scheduled a follow-up with Mr. Harrington for the next day. "Let's talk about what comes next," I said. He didn't miss a beat. "We'll prepare the documents to call for a shareholders meeting. We'll notify the board once everything's ready." "Don't notify them yet," I said. "Not until I give the word." There was a pause on the line. "Elena, may I ask what you're planning?" I looked out the window of my apartment, watching the traffic roll by. People rushing, unaware that everything was about to change. "I'm planning to walk into that boardroom," I said calmly, "and show them exactly who they tried to fire." I didn't show up for the mandatory exit interview. HR called twice, then emailed. I ignored them both. Instead, I sat in the quiet corner booth of a discreet downtown cafe, sipping a flat white while Mr. Harrington reviewed the final draft of the shareholder meeting request. It was official now. On paper, I held 90% of the company's voting power. A legal and financial reality Martin would never have seen coming. "You sure you're ready?" Harrington asked, adjusting his glasses as he slid the documents across the table. "Once you submit this, you'll be throwing a grenade into their boardroom." I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. "They pulled the pin the moment they fired me." He gave a small nod. "Fair enough." The documents were simple, as most powerful things often are. A formal notice of a special shareholder meeting with a single agenda item, leadership review, and appointment of new executive management. Martin wouldn't be expecting it. That was the point. His entire style was built on control through confidence. He bulldozed meetings with jargon, steamrolled quieter voices, and weaponized charm when needed. The board, mostly older men who liked his bravado, had let him run unchecked for too long. They'd soon discover how fragile that kind of power really was. "I'll serve them notice Friday morning," Harrington continued. "The meeting will be set for Tuesday. That gives them 2 business days to panic." I couldn't help but smile. Perfect. That afternoon, I sat down with Caroline Winters, the trustee who had managed the shares since my father's passing. She was sharp, discreet, and had a memory like steel. "I've watched that man dismantle your father's legacy brick by brick," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "You don't owe him politeness." Inside the folder was everything I'd need for Tuesday: ownership certificates, voting records, and a detailed summary of company performance under Martin's leadership. Declining employee satisfaction scores, rising turnover, overspending on executive perks, and a flattening revenue trajectory despite a growing market. "He's been hiding under inflated projections," Caroline said flatly. "If this continues, he'll drive the company into the ground within 2 years." I nodded, absorbing every word. "I'll let the numbers speak for themselves." As I left her office, I walked past the mural in the hallway, an oil painting of my father, standing in front of the first company headquarters. He was younger in the painting than I ever remembered him in life. His hand rested on the shoulder of a small girl in a red dress, me. He believed in legacy, and in people. And even though he wasn't here anymore, I could still feel his hand on my shoulder. By Monday morning, the buzz around my sudden disappearance had turned into full-blown rumors. I got texts from former colleagues. "What happened? Did you quit?" "Martin's acting like nothing happened, but HR is weirdly tight-lipped." "Whatever you did, I hope you're okay." I didn't respond. Not yet. The silence was part of the plan. I wanted Martin confident, certain he'd erased me from the story. Let him play king a little longer. Let him underestimate me one last time. That evening, I stood in front of my mirror, trying on the navy suit I'd bought for special occasions but never worn. It was sharp, tailored, clean. The kind of outfit you wear when you walk into a room not to ask for power, but to own it. I practiced what I'd say. Not a speech. Just a few lines. Precise. Measured, undeniable. The truth would do most of the work for me. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and cool. The city bustled as usual, unaware that inside one boardroom, everything was about to change. I arrived 10 minutes early, walking past the receptionist with quiet confidence. She did a double take, but didn't stop me. Upstairs, the boardroom lights were already on. I could see movement through the frosted glass. Mr. Harrington met me by the elevators, his expression unreadable but calm. "They're in there," he said. "Martin's already speaking. He thinks this is just another quarterly strategy review." Not for long. I took a slow breath, smoothed the front of my jacket, and stepped forward. The door to the boardroom opened with a soft click. Heads turned, conversations stilled. And Martin, mid-sentence, froze when he saw me. "Elena," he said, eyebrows arching, "this meeting is for board members only." I smiled politely, setting the ownership documents on the table. "Exactly." Then I took my seat at the head of the table. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Martin stared at me from the far end of the long oak table, confusion flickering across his face, followed by disbelief. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, trying to place me back in the box he thought he'd locked me in last week. "Elena," he said again, voice sharp now. This is a board meeting. As I already mentioned, employees are not permitted. I'm not here as an employee, I said calmly. I'm here as the majority shareholder. That one sentence shifted the entire energy of the room. Board members glanced at one another, some stiffening, others sitting forward with interest. One of them, Mr. Dalton, who had been with the company since my father's days, looked down at the document I'd placed in front of him, then back up at me with raised eyebrows. Is this accurate? He asked, adjusting his glasses. It is, I replied. 90% of the company's shares were transferred to me through a family trust when I turned 30. All paperwork is in order, filed, notarized, and submitted in accordance with corporate governance. Martin looked from me to Mr. Harrington, who was calmly unfolding a copy of the ownership certificate and handing it to the board secretary. You can't be serious, Martin scoffed, his voice rising. This is absurd. Why would your father— Because he trusted me, I interrupted, and because he knew exactly what this company would become without oversight. The room was still again. Everyone knew what I meant, even if I didn't say it outright. Since my father's death, Martin had turned the culture toxic. He rewarded loyalty over competence, appearance over results, and the numbers had started to show it. Let's get to the point, I continued, opening the second folder I'd brought. As majority shareholder, I've called this special meeting to review the current executive leadership, including the position of Chief Executive Officer. Martin stood now, his face flushed. This is a coup, a personal vendetta. You think you can waltz in here and— I'm not asking, I said, finally raising my voice just enough to command the room. I'm exercising my rights. Then I slid the financial report across the table. Let's talk about performance. I didn't need theatrics. The numbers spoke for themselves. Employee satisfaction down 38% in 2 years. Turnover in key departments up 47%. 3 high-level discrimination complaints under HR review. Flat revenue growth in a market that was booming. I've compiled testimony from department heads, employee surveys, and financial audits. I've also documented misuse of company funds, unauthorized travel, excessive executive bonuses, and misleading investor reports. I glanced at Martin. All signed off under your leadership. Board members began flipping through the pages. Mr. Dalton looked genuinely disturbed. The CFO, who had sat quietly until now, leaned over to whisper something to the general counsel, who immediately began typing on his tablet. Martin's jaw clenched. You're twisting data to make your little revenge fantasy look legitimate. I don't need to twist anything, I said. I have evidence. You relied on the assumption that no one powerful enough would ever question you. That assumption ends today. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Effective immediately, I said, pulling out the final document. I am submitting a motion to remove Martin Rees as CEO of this company. As majority shareholder, my vote is sufficient to carry the motion. The board secretary looked stunned. You don't need a second vote? I own 90%, I said simply. A majority by any definition. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. In accordance with company bylaws, the motion stands, effective upon completion of documentation. Martin slammed a hand on the table. You can't do this. I already did. Security didn't need to be called. Martin didn't resist. But as he stormed out, his face a twisted mix of rage and disbelief, I noticed something remarkable. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small. Once the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled slowly and turned to face the rest of the board. This company deserves better, I said. So do its people. And starting today, that's exactly what they're going to get. Mr. Dalton nodded slowly, a faint smile forming. Welcome back, Elena. By the end of the week, Martin's nameplate had been removed from the CEO's office door. I didn't move into the office immediately. I didn't need the symbolism of a bigger desk to confirm my position. I had something more important to do first. Rebuild the soul of the company my father started. The Monday following the shareholders' meeting, I called an all-hands staff meeting in the main conference hall, the same space where Martin had once paraded sales projections like war medals and handed out empty praise to the same handful of executives over and over again. But this time, the energy was different. Curious, hesitant, hopeful. Employees filed in slowly, murmuring among themselves. The front rows were empty, as if no one wanted to seem too eager. Some looked nervous, others suspicious. They'd been burned before. I stood alone at the front of the room, holding no notes, no slides, just my truth. Some of you know me, I began. Some of you only know what you've been told. But let me start by saying this. I didn't come here to take power. I came here to restore trust. A few heads tilted. People were listening. For years, this company ran on the strength of its people, on your ideas, your late nights, your belief that what we were building mattered, and somewhere along the way, that got lost. I paused, letting the silence fill the room. I was fired last week, I said, smiling faintly. Told I wasn't what this company needed, that I lacked the leadership to take us into the future. A few people chuckled, nervously at first, but the tension began to shift. My honesty was disarming them. I didn't fight back. Not then, because I knew something Martin didn't. That leadership isn't about volume or vanity. It's about vision and respect, and lifting the people who actually do the work. I looked out over the crowd, locking eyes with a few familiar faces. Engineers I'd worked alongside for years, assistants who were always overlooked, junior analysts who had been stuck under layers of corporate ego. Starting today, everything changes. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something radical. I listened. I met with department heads, team leads, interns, receptionists, custodial staff. I asked what wasn't working. I asked what they needed. I asked who they thought deserved more than they were getting. And then I acted. I promoted Maya from the customer service team to head of client experience, a role she'd unofficially been doing for a year while her actual manager took credit for every success. I brought back Kevin, a brilliant product developer who had resigned after being repeatedly passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified men. I restructured HR entirely. The complaints that had gathered dust in forgotten folders, I read every single one. Several mid-level managers were quietly let go within the first week. People who had cultivated cultures of fear and favoritism under Martin's watch. Then I launched something my father had once dreamed of, the People First Initiative, a new internal program to recognize innovation, reward collaboration, and promote equity, no matter the job title. No more whisper networks, no more glass ceilings, just good people doing great work, and finally getting credit for it. Late one evening, I walked the halls of the office alone. The energy was different now. Softer, brighter. The break room had laughter again. People were staying late because they wanted to, not because they feared what would happen if they didn't. Desks were decorated again. Photos of families, plants, personality. Things that had slowly disappeared under Martin's reign. In one quiet hallway, I passed a whiteboard near the engineering bullpen. Someone had scrawled in blue marker. She came back. 3 simple words, underlined twice. I stood there a moment, reading it over and over. Not, she took over. Not, she fired Martin. She came back. That mattered more than any title I now held. The following week, I finally moved into the CEO's office. Not because I needed the space, but because it was time. The nameplate was new. Sleek, brushed steel with simple, elegant lettering. Elena Wren, Chief Executive Officer. I didn't bring much with me. Just one framed photo. My father and I on the company's opening day. Both smiling, both hopeful. I placed it on the corner of the desk and sat down. Not with a sense of conquest, but of continuation. This wasn't just my company now. It was my responsibility. And I intended to honor it. It was exactly 1 year to the day since I'd been fired. 12 months since I walked out of this building with a cardboard box and a polite smile, dismissed as not what the company needed. 12 months since Martin had stripped me of my title, unaware that I held something far more powerful. And now, as I stood in front of the same glass doors, this time in a tailored suit, a sleek leather folder under my arm, and the full weight of the company's future resting on my shoulders, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not triumph, just peace. I nodded to the front desk receptionist, who now stood the moment I entered. "Morning, Ms. Wren. Elena, please," I said with a smile. "We're all on the same team." The elevators chimed softly as I rode to the top floor, what used to be Martin's domain. Now it was mine. But I hadn't remodeled it for show. I kept the original walnut desk, the same broad windows overlooking the city. What changed were the photos on the walls. Images of our employees, of team retreats, of product launches led by names that had too often gone unrecognized. And on the far wall, directly behind my chair, hung a large portrait of my father. Not as a monument to him, but as a reminder to me. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began reviewing the quarterly report. It was our strongest quarter in 5 years. Customer satisfaction up 23%. Employee retention up 41%. Revenue? Breaking records. But what mattered more was how we did it. Ethically, collaboratively, transparently. The company culture had shifted. People no longer whispered complaints over coffee. They spoke freely and were actually heard. Feedback loops were open. Diversity in leadership had doubled. We didn't just bring good people in. We finally gave them a place to grow. There was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I said. It was Maya, now the head of client experience. Her eyes sparkled even behind her glasses. "You ready?" she asked. "They're waiting in the conference room." I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. "Let's do it." The boardroom looked different now, too. Not in decor, but in presence. For the first time in company history, half the board were women. Several members were under 40. They brought new perspectives, asked harder questions, and made better decisions. At the center of the table sat Richard Tanaka, one of our new strategic advisors. Brilliant mind, decent heart. The kind of person my father would have trusted. "Before we begin," Richard said, gesturing toward me, "Elena has a few words." I hadn't planned to speak, but standing there with every eye on me, not in judgment, but in respect, I realized something. This was the moment my father had prepared me for. "I want to thank you all," I said, "for believing in change, for making hard decisions when easy ones would have been safer, and for helping me rebuild a company that puts people before power." I paused, letting the words settle. "Someone once told me I lacked leadership," I continued. "But leadership isn't about volume or title. It's about vision, accountability, and the courage to do what's right, especially when it's inconvenient." I smiled, not for show, but for real. My father built this company with those values. I'm proud to say, we're finally living up to them again. A quiet beat, then applause. Not thunderous, just warm, genuine. The kind that stays with you. That afternoon, I took the long way back to my office, walking through each department, the way I used to when I was just another face in the crowd. I stopped to check in with teams, to laugh with developers, to high-five marketing interns who just pulled off their first big campaign. In the break room, someone had baked cupcakes for an intern's last day. I took one, sat down among them, and talked about nothing important for 20 minutes. Because this wasn't just a company. It was a place where people felt they belonged. And that, more than stock prices or titles or revenge, was the real win. The maitre d' barely glanced at me before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, madam, but there's no reservation under your name." I blinked, momentarily thrown off. That's impossible. I was invited to dinner with my husband's family. They should already be here. He gave me a polite but firm smile. I just checked. There's a reservation for 6 under Morgan Sinclair, but I'm afraid... A sharp, familiar voice cut through the conversation. Oh, Claire. Morgan's voice rang out, dripping with amusement. Did you really think I'd include you in tonight's dinner? I turned to see my mother-in-law standing just a few feet away, dressed in her usual designer ensemble, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled. Seated behind her, my husband, Adam, sat stiffly, his gaze darting between us, clearly uncomfortable but saying nothing. Beside him, his sisters, Charlotte and Emma, whispered to each other, smirking. I felt my stomach twist, but I refused to let it show. I don't understand, I said, my voice calm. Morgan's smile widened. Oh, sweetheart, I didn't think you'd actually come. She chuckled as if I had done something amusing. This is a family dinner. A place like this is... Well, it's a bit out of your league, don't you think? Maybe a budget restaurant suits you better. Charlotte snickered behind her wine glass. Emma avoided my gaze. Adam... He just sat there, gripping his fork. Silent. I felt the weight of humiliation settle in, the judgment in the air thick enough to choke on. Other guests were beginning to notice, their curious glances flicking toward the unfolding drama. I should have seen this coming. For years, Morgan had made it abundantly clear that I was never good enough for her son. I didn't come from old money like she did. I didn't attend prestigious schools. I wasn't born into their privileged world. From the moment Adam and I got engaged, Morgan had gone out of her way to remind me that I didn't belong. At first, it was subtle. The passive-aggressive comments about my simple tastes, the way she would conveniently forget to invite me to family events, the expensive gifts she would buy for Adam while giving me nothing but empty smiles. But tonight she had taken things to a whole new level. She had planned this. She had arranged for my husband's family to have a luxurious dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, ensuring I would be left standing at the entrance like an unwanted outsider. And she was enjoying every second of it. The humiliation should have burned. I should have felt small. But instead, something inside me clicked. I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made Morgan's expression falter for just a second. Then, without a word, I turned to the maitre d'. Would you be so kind as to ask the owner to come out? I asked, my voice smooth and confident. Morgan let out a laugh. Oh, please. Do you really think the owner of this place is going to come out here just because you asked? I turned back to her and met her gaze evenly. Yes. Because the owner of this restaurant? He knew me very well. And in a few moments, my dear mother-in-law was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Morgan's smirk didn't waver, but I could see it. The slightest flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had spent years treating me like an outsider. But tonight, she had escalated her little game into outright humiliation. And she had done it in front of my husband, his sisters, and a restaurant full of people. The air around us felt thick, heavy with anticipation as I stood my ground, refusing to let her win. The maitre d' hesitated, clearly unsure whether to humor my request. But before he could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. Claire? I turned just as Daniel Laurent, the owner of this exclusive establishment, stepped into view. A man in his early 50s, Daniel was the definition of refined elegance. Salt and pepper hair, a tailored suit, and the kind of confidence that came with owning one of the most sought-after restaurants in the city. Morgan's eyes widened slightly as she registered the way he looked at me. Not with dismissal, but with genuine warmth. Daniel? I greeted, my smile widening. It's been a while. His gaze flickered over to Morgan, then to Adam and his sisters, before settling back on me. It has. What brings you here tonight? I gestured toward the table where my in-laws sat, their expressions shifting from amusement to something far more uncertain. Apparently, I wasn't included in the reservation, I said lightly. A bit of an oversight, wouldn't you say? Daniel's eyes darkened slightly, catching the unspoken subtext in my words. Then, just as quickly, a polite smile curved his lips. That won't do at all, Morgan scoffed, crossing her arms. Oh, please, do you really think this restaurant can just find a seat for her? This is a private dining establishment. You don't just walk in and expect a table. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Sinclair, he said smoothly. This restaurant does not accept last-minute walk-ins. I felt a pang of disappointment, but before I could respond, he turned toward the maître d'. But Claire is not a walk-in. She is family. The entire table froze. Charlotte's glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Emma's eyes darted between me and Daniel in shock. And Adam? His grip tightened on his silverware, but still he said nothing. Morgan, however, wasn't one to back down easily. She let out a disbelieving laugh. Family? Oh, this is rich. You must be mistaken. Claire is my son's wife, and I assure you she has no connections to— Actually, I interrupted smoothly. Daniel and I go way back. Morgan narrowed her eyes. How? I leaned forward slightly, my voice just loud enough for those at the nearby tables to overhear. Before I married Adam, I used to work in fine dining. And Daniel? He was my mentor. A stunned silence settled over the table. Morgan opened her mouth, likely to protest, but Daniel cut her off with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Claire isn't just some former employee, he said calmly. She trained under me when she was fresh out of culinary school. I personally taught her everything she knows about hospitality and high-end service. She was one of the best students I ever had. Morgan's jaw tightened. This was not going how she had planned. I could see the realization settling in. The fact that, despite all of her efforts to belittle me, I had a past she knew nothing about. A past that now undermined her entire stunt. And I wasn't finished. I turned to the maitre d', still standing awkwardly at his podium. I assume Daniel's word is good enough to find me a seat? The maitre d' immediately straightened. Of course, Miss Claire. I'll have the staff prepare a table right away. Morgan's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. This is ridiculous, she hissed under her breath. You're telling me she gets special treatment just because she used to work for you? Daniel chuckled. No, she gets special treatment because she earned it. The maitre d' signaled for a waiter, who hurried over and began setting a place at their table, right next to Adam. Oh, I mused, feigning surprise. Looks like there's actually plenty of room after all. Morgan's fingers curled into fists against the tablecloth. This is absurd. I leaned in just slightly, lowering my voice so that only she could hear. What's absurd is that you thought you could humiliate me and get away with it. Her nostrils flared. You're being dramatic. I shrugged. I'm just enjoying dinner with my family. Isn't that what you wanted? Before she could snap back, Daniel patted my shoulder. I'll have the chef send over something special for you, Claire. Morgan nearly choked. Something special? Daniel smiled. On the house, of course. Morgan was seething now, but there was nothing she could do. Adam, still silent, reached for his drink. But I caught the flicker of something in his expression. Was it relief? Embarrassment? Shame? I wasn't sure. But what I did know was that this dinner had just begun. And Morgan Sinclair? She was going to regret ever thinking I could be dismissed so easily. The waiter placed a freshly polished silver plate in front of me, followed by an elegant amuse-bouche. Something delicate, artfully arranged and entirely complimentary, courtesy of Daniel. Morgan's expression? Pure unfiltered rage. Oh, I murmured, picking up my fork and slicing through the dish with practiced ease. This looks incredible. I took a bite, savoring it. Not just the taste, but the deliciously tense silence that followed. Across the table, Charlotte and Emma exchanged wary glances. Adam still hadn't said a word, choosing instead to stare at his wine glass as if it held the answers to his problems. Morgan, however, wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She took a slow sip of her own wine before placing the glass down with a little too much force. "Well," she said, forcing a tight smile, "I suppose it's only natural that someone like you would know people in hospitality." I arched a brow. "Hospitality?" Morgan waved a hand, feigning politeness. "You know, service industries, waiting tables, kitchen work. Not exactly the kind of careers we're accustomed to in this family." Ah, there it was. The real reason she had orchestrated this entire charade. It wasn't just about excluding me from dinner. It was about reminding me, in front of everyone, that in her eyes, I was still just a woman who had worked her way up from nothing. I took another sip of wine before responding. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Morgan's eyes flickered with something, annoyance, maybe even a bit of surprise. She had expected me to be rattled, but I wasn't. Not anymore. "I simply meant," she continued, "that it must have been quite an adjustment for you, marrying into a family like ours." Her tone was light, but the words dripped with condescension. And Adam, still, said nothing. I turned my gaze to him, studying the way he refused to meet my eyes. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about his mother's cruelty. This was about his silence. Because this wasn't the first time Morgan had tried to humiliate me. It had happened at our wedding when she conveniently forgot to invite my side of the family to the rehearsal dinner. It had happened at Christmas when she gifted me a cookbook titled "Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife" in front of an entire room of people. It had happened last summer when she made a snide remark about how fortunate I was that Adam had taken a chance on me. And every single time, Adam had let it slide. And I had told myself it wasn't worth fighting over, that I didn't want to be the cause of conflict. But this was different. This wasn't just a passive-aggressive comment. This was an orchestrated attempt to humiliate me in public. And he had let it happen. I set my wine glass down, the movement slow, deliberate. Then I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. "Morgan," I said, my voice smooth, even. "Do you know what the difference is between you and me?" She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes despite herself. I smiled. "I worked for everything I have." A sharp, stunned silence fell over the table. Morgan's face hardened. "Excuse me?" I didn't blink. "You heard me?" I felt Charlotte stiffen beside her mother. Emma pressed her lips together as if suppressing a laugh. Morgan scoffed. "Are you trying to imply that I haven't worked for what I have?" I let the question hang in the air. And then, before she could formulate another condescending response, I added, "I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't inherit status. I built my career from the ground up. And yet," I gestured at the table. "Here we are, sitting at the same restaurant, eating the same food, with the same level of respect from the owner." Morgan's fingers curled around her napkin, knuckles white. Charlotte and Emma weren't laughing anymore. And Adam? He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. For the first time since I had met Morgan, I saw something flicker across her face. Something she usually hid too well. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Because she had spent years trying to convince herself that I didn't belong, that I was lesser, that I was just some gold digger who had latched onto her son. But now she was starting to realize the truth. And the truth was that I was not someone she could break. I picked up my fork, casually cutting into my dish again. "Oh, and Morgan?" She exhaled sharply through her nose, clearly furious that I had stolen control of the conversation. "What?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You should be careful about who you look down on." I speared a bite of food and placed it in my mouth, chewing slowly before adding, "You never know who might end up above you." The tension at the table was suffocating. Morgan, usually poised and in complete control, sat stone-faced, her fingers curled so tightly around her wine glass that I half expected it to shatter. Adam looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Charlotte and Emma were stealing glances at each other, clearly wondering if they should intervene. And me? I had never felt more certain of my place. I could see it in Morgan's expression, the way her carefully curated mask of superiority had cracked, even if just for a moment. She wasn't used to being challenged. She had built her power on people bending to her will, on people being too afraid or too polite to put her in her place. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Morgan took a slow breath, composing herself before placing her glass down with a soft but deliberate click. "I see," she said finally, her voice deceptively smooth. "I suppose I should commend you, Claire. You've managed to elevate yourself beyond your circumstances." I took another sip of my wine, not giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. "But tell me," she continued, her lips curving into a saccharine smile, "if you're so independent, so self-made, why is it that my son is the one paying for your lifestyle?" I paused. Charlotte let out a quiet gasp. Emma shifted uncomfortably. "And Adam?" Adam flinched. Morgan's smile sharpened. She could feel the eyes of the table on me now, waiting for a response. I set my glass down, my movements slow and deliberate. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, feigning confusion. Morgan leaned forward, dropping her voice to a mocking whisper. "I mean, darling, that my son is the reason you can afford that lovely little boutique job of yours, isn't he? You don't actually need to work, yet you play pretend at having a career. How charming." She tilted her head, her smug smile returning. "You talk about self-sufficiency, but at the end of the day, you're still just someone my son supports." And there it was, her final card. The insult meant to humiliate me beyond recovery. The final blow to put me back in my place. I let the words settle, taking in the way Adam still refused to look at me. The way his sisters held their breath, waiting for me to crumble. And then I laughed. Not a small, embarrassed chuckle. A full, genuine laugh. Morgan's smirk faltered. "I'm sorry, is something funny?" I placed my napkin back onto the table, still chuckling. "I just realized how truly out of touch you are, Morgan." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" I gestured toward Adam, my voice calm and deliberate. "You think he supports me?" I asked, arching a brow. "That's adorable." Charlotte made a choking sound. Emma's lips parted in shock. "And Adam?" Adam went pale. Morgan's smile dropped instantly. "What are you talking about?" I sighed, almost pitying her. "You still see Adam as your little boy, don't you? The one in control, the provider, the man who rescued me from my lowly life." I tilted my head. "But let me tell you something, Morgan. That's not how this marriage works." Morgan stiffened. "You want to know what's funny?" I continued. "Adam's business, his investment projects, half of them were funded with my money." A stunned silence fell over the table. Morgan's eyes widened, her entire world shifting in real time. What?" she whispered. I smiled, but this time there was no warmth in it. "Adam didn't build his career alone," I continued, still speaking to her but keeping my gaze locked on my husband. "When he wanted to start investing, he didn't have the capital." I picked up my wine glass again. "But I did." Morgan's fingers twitched. "That's not possible." I shrugged. "Believe what you want. But the reality is, your son's success is built on my investments, my strategies, and my support." Charlotte and Emma looked at Adam for confirmation. But Adam, still silent, still frozen in place. I shook my head. "You think you can humiliate me by painting me as some dependent little housewife? That's laughable. Because the truth, Morgan? Adam needs me far more than I need him." Morgan's face turned a deep shade of red. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You spent all these years trying to make me feel like I don't belong. But I've been the one keeping this marriage, and by extension, your precious family name, afloat." Emma looked like she was about to pass out. Charlotte? Completely speechless. And Adam? Adam finally opened his mouth. Claire, he croaked. Maybe we should. I held up a hand, cutting him off. No, Adam, I said, my voice firm. You don't get to. Maybe we should me right now. Not after you sat here in silence while your mother tried to humiliate me. Morgan looked at him now, realizing for the first time that her son, her golden boy, was completely spineless. And suddenly, she didn't look as proud of him anymore. For the first time, she looked at him like he was small, like he was beneath her expectations, like he had failed her. A delicious role reversal. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. I think I'm done here. Morgan's nostrils flared. You can't just. I turned to Daniel, who had been watching from a polite distance. Daniel, it was lovely seeing you. Thank you for the hospitality. Daniel nodded, amused. Always a pleasure, Claire. Then I looked at Adam. You coming? He hesitated, staring at me, then at his mother. And in that moment, I knew. I knew exactly what he was going to do. Because Adam had never chosen me before. And he wasn't about to start now. Morgan smiled, triumphant. And I? I smiled right back. Because what she didn't know was, I had already made my choice too. And soon, she was going to regret ever trying to put me in my place. Because I was about to show her, and Adam, exactly how powerful I really was. Adam didn't follow me. I hadn't expected him to. As I stepped outside the restaurant, the cool night air brushed against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was sharp, clear. This dinner had been a long overdue wake-up call, a moment of truth that had been years in the making. And now, it was time to act. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I typed a message. Me. We're moving forward. Initiate the process first thing tomorrow. Within seconds, the response came. Attorney. Understood. You'll have the first draft of the divorce settlement by noon. I exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. Divorce. The word didn't scare me. What scared me was how long I had ignored the truth. That Adam had never been on my side. That for years I had been alone in my own marriage. But not anymore. Tonight had been the final push I needed. And Morgan? She had no idea just how thoroughly I was about to upend the life she had worked so hard to control. I arrived home before Adam, which gave me just enough time to do what needed to be done. First, I walked into the home office, the one that Adam used for his investments. And I opened the safe. The passcode? He had never changed it. A mistake. Inside were all the financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, business agreements, and the one I was most interested in. The contract that tied his most lucrative investment to my initial funding. I picked it up, scanning the familiar legal jargon. This was the document that proved I was the financial backbone of his entire empire. Morgan thought her son was the great businessman of the family. But without me, he was nothing. I took a quick photo of the contract, then placed it back exactly where I found it. There was no need to take it, not when I already had what I needed. Next, I went to the bedroom. I pulled out a suitcase and began packing. Not in anger, not in haste, but in absolute clarity. This wasn't an emotional decision. This was a calculated departure. By the time Adam walked through the front door, I was sitting on the couch, suitcase by my side, waiting. He paused in the doorway, staring at me like he wasn't sure if he had come home to the right house. Claire? I tilted my head. Took you long enough. His eyes darted to the suitcase, his breath catching. What are you doing? I stood up, calm and controlled. Leaving. Adam's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. You made your choice, Adam, I said smoothly. Back there at the restaurant. When your mother humiliated me, again, and you just sat there. His jaw tensed. I was trying to keep the peace. I laughed. Peace? Adam, your mother planned this entire dinner to embarrass me. She booked a table and left me off the reservation on purpose. She insulted me. She tried to make me feel like I didn't belong. I stepped closer, watching him shrink slightly under my gaze. And you let her. Just like you always do. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly flustered. It's complicated, Claire. You know how she is. I let out a breath. No, Adam. It's simple. You're weak. His eyes snapped to mine, offended. But it was the truth. You've spent our entire marriage letting your mother dictate how you treat me. I was patient, Adam. I gave you so many chances. But tonight? I shook my head. Tonight, I finally saw you for what you are. Adam swallowed hard. Claire, let's just talk about this. I sighed. That's the problem, Adam. There's nothing left to talk about. I picked up my suitcase and brushed past him. And then, just as I reached the door, I'll fight you on this. I turned. What? Adam's face had darkened, his voice low. If you think you're walking away from this marriage with half of everything, you're mistaken. I stared at him for a moment before smiling. Oh, Adam, I said softly. You really should read your own contracts more carefully. Confusion flickered across his face. What? I cut him off. You wouldn't even have half of what you own if it weren't for me. You used my money to build your investments. And guess what? I let the moment hang. I have all the paperwork to prove it. His face drained of color. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I let you borrow my money, Adam. I let you build something with it. But now? I smiled. Now I want it back. Adam staggered back a step, the reality hitting him all at once. He thought he could threaten me? He had no idea who he was dealing with. Adam stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale, his jaw clenched. I could see the exact moment the realization hit him. That I wasn't just leaving him. I was taking everything he thought he controlled. He opened his mouth, probably to argue, to beg, to try and manipulate me like he always had. But I didn't give him the chance. I'll be staying at the penthouse, I said, adjusting the strap of my bag over my shoulder. His brows furrowed. What penthouse? I smiled, tilting my head slightly. Oh, Adam, the one you think you own. I watched as confusion turned into horror. The downtown penthouse? He asked, voice uneven. The one I bought under my name? Yes, I said smoothly. I had my lawyer review the ownership documents earlier today. It was never yours, Adam. His nostrils flared. You wouldn't... I already did. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the counter. He hesitated before opening it, his eyes skimming over the legal document inside. His hands shook. This... He swallowed. This says you own 51% of my investment firm. I nodded. Correct? His breathing turned shallow. That's impossible. I shrugged. Not really. I was the initial investor, remember? I never transferred ownership over to you. You just assumed I did because, well, you never actually read the contracts, did you? I watched as panic took over his features, his mind racing, probably wondering how the hell he had let this happen. Claire, he said, voice tight, you can't just take this from me. I smiled. I'm not taking anything. I already own it. He staggered back, gripping the counter. This was the man who had let his mother humiliate me, who had sat there in cowardly silence while she tried to strip me of my dignity. Now he was the one powerless. I don't understand, he muttered. Why? Why are you doing this? And for the first time in years, I felt completely, undeniably free. Because, Adam, I said, I finally see my worth. And with that, I turned and walked out of the house, for the last time. A month later, I sat in the penthouse, legs crossed, a glass of champagne in my hand. Across from me, my attorney smiled as she slid the finalized divorce papers toward me. It's official. You're free. I exhaled slowly, running my fingers over the thick paper. Free. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. The legal battle? Short and brutal. Adam had tried to fight, of course. He had stormed into meetings, demanded a better deal, threatened to take me to court. But the moment my lawyers laid out the documents proving I was the true majority shareholder in his firm, his arrogance had collapsed. Morgan had tried to intervene. She had called me, furious, accusing me of being a gold-digging snake. I had simply responded, "If you raised him better, this wouldn't have happened." And then, I blocked her number, because Morgan Sinclair was no longer my problem. I lifted the champagne glass to my lips, savoring the moment. And then, as if the universe wanted to gift me one last laugh, my phone buzzed. "Adam, can we talk?" I smirked, setting the glass down and typing back. "Me. About what?" A pause. Then, "Adam, I don't know what to do." I exhaled, shaking my head. It was sad, really. For years, I had waited for Adam to show up for me, to be the man I thought I married. I had waited for him to stand up to his mother, to fight for me the way I had fought for him. But now I saw him for exactly what he was. A man who had spent his life hiding behind the power of others, too weak to build anything on his own. And the irony? He needed me now more than ever. But I didn't need him at all. I typed one final message. Me. That's not my problem anymore. Then I blocked his number too, because for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. And that was the most powerful thing I had ever done.